All right. Chapter 19 is where we're going to spend the majority of our time this morning. We are going to try and get to a little bit of overview of the whole book at the end. I do think that's going to be pretty important. I think that's important. So we're going to try and kind of rush through this piece of it. But chapter 19. Chapter 19 is where you get the actual trial of Jesus, right? Everybody remembers this, right? You get this whole back and forth between the high priest, and then you go to Pilate, and you have to go to Pilate's seat. There's potentially some irony here, right? I think the irony here is Pilate's seat and then Pilate's writings. So what do I mean when I say that? Can anybody guess at what I mean? Why that would be ironic? Why is it ironic that Pilate's seat versus where Jesus is? Or why is it ironic that Pilate writes what he writes in so many languages? Why would I say that? Ooh, good thought. Okay, I might disagree with you, but I understand where you're coming from. I could see that. I could see that perspective. What he meant, right? The comment was what he meant as a mockery, right? He's going to mock Jesus into saying this is the King of the Jews. Anybody else have any guesses about why there might be some irony here? So I would say we talk about here when Jesus goes before Pilate. Pilate sits in the judgment seat, right? What have we talked about in previous chapters when Christ is given what over the world? Christ is given what from the Father? Authority. He's given judgment. He came to judge, but he's not here to judge, but he can judge, right? There's this whole theme of judgment kind of throughout this book, and here Pilate is sitting as judge over Jesus. So I find that kind of ironic, right, in terms of the judge is over the judge, but he's really subservient to this judge because he's choosing. I find that kind of ironic personally. I say the writings because what is the purpose? Why were the Jewish leadership trying to deal with Jesus? Why were they trying to kill him? To what? For their own power? What does that mean, though, to them? To do what physically to him? To kill him, but to stop what? Stop his message, to stop him, to keep him from moving outward, to keep his disciples from growing, right? To essentially, to silence him. And here you have Pilate who does what? He not only says okay, listen, this man should not be killed, but if you want to do it, you can. I will give you authority to do that. But I'm going to write that he's the King of the Jews in every kind of modern language that's spoken at that time. So I find that ironic because now Pilate is now attaching this sign to Jesus saying, here's the king. And anybody that comes in contact with that sign is going to be able to read that sign. And I find that kind of ironic. That their whole goal is to silence him. And here Pilate is kind of saying nah, I'm going to write this so that everybody can see it. You have something? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. You have something? I think there's some implication, right? It's implied that maybe Pilate knew a little more than is what's written, which is why I might say maybe he didn't write it as a mockery. Maybe. Don't know. I can't say for sure, right? I'm just saying there are different perspectives we can take here. Okay, so I think the word behold, right? Okay, Jesus is on the cross, his mother's there, and John is there, and he tells them, listen, you all are now, John, this is your mother. Hey, Mom, John is now your son. He's going to take care of you. And I find that level of relationship to be extremely interesting. Jesus had family. Jesus had brothers, right? We learned earlier that Jesus had brothers. So it would have fallen to them to take care of Mom once Jesus is gone, right? But here Jesus is saying no, John, our relationship is such that I want you to take care of Mom. I find that extremely powerful. I don't know that there's any necessarily lesson there for us other than that this relationship with Jesus was so close that that's the way Jesus felt about John. Yeah. And yes. Yeah. Maybe in some ways should be, right? If your family is outside of the body of Christ, maybe that relationship should be strong. I don't, again, like I'm not necessarily going to make that a concrete statement. I wouldn't live or die by that statement, but I do find it very interesting that Jesus says, behold your son, behold your mother. Should we all strive for that level of relationship with Jesus, right? Like that's kind of where I'm at. Again, we get this theme of lifted up, right? We've talked about this kind of over and over again about how the serpent in the wilderness was lifted up. Now the Son of Man is being lifted up, right? You get this whole motif that kind of, again, paints itself very physically in this particular time in this chapter. And fear. Okay, so where I talk about Pilate, look at chapter 19, verses 7 and 8, okay? John chapter 19, verses 7 and 8. The Jews answered him, we have a law, and according to that law, he ought to die, because he has made himself the Son of God. And when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. What is Pilate afraid of? What is Pilate afraid of here? That it's right. Like, what if he's right? And again, you get this whole discourse, right? Like one of the most famous lines of this whole book is Pilate asking Jesus, what is truth, right? That is like one of my favorite lines. What is truth? And you get Pilate here in this very next chapter being like, I am afraid, essentially, of this might be the truth. And I love that. Okay, we got a lot. You first. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep. It's very plausible. Yeah. Again, in some ways, the Romans are more open to accepting Christ as a God than the Jews are, right? Because it's so counterintuitive to the way the Jewish people would think. Yeah. Yeah. There's the whole family dynamic here, right? Like his wife is telling him, have nothing to do with this man. And now the Jews are saying, he says he's the Son of God. He says he's afraid. So yeah, yes. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever, like how many of us have known, I'll say an older Christian, but a mature Christian, whether that could be young or old, who whenever you speak to them, they have a presence. They have an aura, right? Like they have something where you're just like, I feel different around this person, whether that's a man or a woman or a couple. Like if you're in someone's home, like you just feel different when you walk around that person. Yeah. And I think, right, that's indicated in the conversations that Jesus has with all of the people up to this point, right? In every instance of these signs or these miracles, right, you talk about the Samaritan woman by the well, and like she immediately opens up to this man that she's never met before. So there's something to the way he's asking the questions or the aura that he has, right? Just the way that he presents himself that is not combative. He is combative in terms of, I'm going to confront your wrong behavior, but the way that he does it is not, he doesn't shut people down, right? It's not you all just sit back and be quiet and let me preach to you. He has a conversation with all these people, and he's going to be hard on them, but he has a conversation. He meets them where they are, I guess is the easiest way to say it. Anything else? Okay. We're going to talk slightly about the hyssop. After this, Jesus, knowing that all was now finished, said, to fulfill the scripture, I thirst. A jar full of sour wine stood there, so they put a sponge in the wine on a hyssop branch and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, it is finished. And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. The hyssop branch, right, is used in Leviticus in terms of purifying things, right, and applying blood to different pieces of the Jewish temple, just in general, the rituals that they would do around their temple, right, the hyssop branch was used. Again, used in Numbers in terms of the priests. The priest shall take a cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet yarn and throw them in the fire. This has to do with some leprosy laws down in Numbers. Not super important. Hebrews 9, right? Hebrews is like the closing chapter on the Jewish law, in my opinion, right? Like Hebrews is like Jesus ties all this up in a bow, and here it is. I'm going to lay this out for you. So, again, we talk about here, this is the blood of the covenant that God commanded you, and by the same way that he sprinkled with the blood both the tent and all the vessels used in worship, and indeed under the law almost everything is purified with blood, and without the shedding of blood there is no forgiveness of sin. So this leads into the blood and the water, right? The soldier pierces Jesus' side, and what flows out? Blood and water. Blood and water. Okay, so blood, again, Jewish law here. We're talking blood is atonement, right? The life is in the what? In the blood, right? So a life has to be given, a life has to be spent in order to atone, in order to pay for, in order to cover up sin, right? And here you got Leviticus, the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it for you on the altar to make atonement for your souls. It is the blood that makes atonement by the life. In Hebrews, again, indeed, under the law, almost everything is purified with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sin. And then again, John writes later in 1 John, but if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his Son, cleanses us from all sin. Find that interesting? Keep going. Water is what in the old law? Water is what? What does it do? Purifies, right? It cleans. It cleanses. It's a purification, right? So you shall bring Aaron and his sons to the entrance of the tent of meeting and wash them with water. This is in terms of preparing them to be the priest. Again, this is repeated in Leviticus regarding the purification of priests. And Moses brought Aaron and his sons, washed them with water. It's even commanded, by the way, in Leviticus 8:4. If you go look at that section, in the very beginning of Leviticus they're talking about purifying priests, and it says, oh, you must consecrate them and do this and this and this and this and this. And the very first thing that Moses does was not commanded. Was not expressly written in those previous verses. Moses knows the first thing we got to do is wash them with water, which I find really interesting, right? Is that this water is this purification piece, right? It's going to purify the people. It's going to purify the priests. And in Ezekiel, right, you get this prophecy about, I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean from all your uncleanness, and from all your idols I will cleanse you. So again, this water is this cleansing thing, right? It's this cleansing, call it an entity. Call it a thing, whatever you want to say. We'll come back to that, okay? Hold that in your mind. It is finished. Where does Jesus say this? It's the easy one. Come on, softball. Where does Jesus say this? On the cross. Right, this is what he says right before he dies. It is finished. Okay. I learned this like yesterday, and I got to share it with you all because I find it super, super fascinating. The Greek word here is, I don't know how to say that, telos, whatever it is. This word is used in Greek primarily in two ways, okay? The first way is in a military context. Caesar would often put out orders and say, like, it is finished, using the same word. The orders are finished. The mission was successful. We are done with these orders. I have done what we came to do. We were successful in this mission. That is a military context, right? The second way that this word gets used is in an accounting context. If you owed someone money and you went and closed your account with them and said, listen, I'm paid up, I'm done, everything is done, the same word is used. The debt is paid, the account is closed, you don't owe me anything anymore. So why is Jesus saying, it is finished? We just read that as, oh, I'm dead. It's finished. My work here is done. But if you think about these two contexts in terms of the orders are done, my mission is accomplished, and the debt is paid, how does that apply to us? How does that apply to any Christian? The price is paid. Yeah, what? He paid the price, right? Your account is closed. What about from this military context? The plan of salvation, right? He's defeated it. He's defeated death. And yes, he's technically dying in this moment. Somebody else has something? I find this extremely fascinating. I find this extremely interesting, right? And that this is the way that it's written, and I know that the way that this is written, right, in terms of I can't necessarily put my motives onto John, but I can say the Holy Spirit wrote this through John to say, you get this whole broad meaning of this word. You get this whole broad meaning of this statement, more so than just like, guys, I'm dead. I'm dying. Done. Finished. That instead of just that, it's this whole broad picture of my work is done. Your debt is paid. My orders here, the work of the Father, I have completed, and we are done with it. I find that extremely fascinating. Yes? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. John chapter 20. You get a lot of running in this chapter, right? Jesus is dead. They buried him. Talks about Mary ran. She ran. And then Peter and John ran. They ran. And I do love the little dig, right? The little dig here of who outran who. John outran Peter. I love it. Just a little dig. Like one disciple outran the other one. I don't know. This just happened. I don't know. The weeping aspect, again, you get there. I did not super analyze this section of text for different literary structures that might point to something different. But there's when Mary gets to the tomb, the angels ask her, "Why are you weeping?" She turns around and then Jesus asks her the exact same question, "Why are you weeping?" So, right, more than likely there is some kind of literary device being used here to point us to something different. But I do find it interesting that there's just this repetition again. This weeping for your Savior, this weeping for your rabbi, for your teacher. And ultimately the question is why? Why are you crying for him? This is potentially this is the greatest thing that could ever happen. And do we think about it that way? I've told Lindsay over and over again, I feel like with the Lord's Supper talks, I have often focused on the guilt part of it, the bad part of it, how much guilt do I have? Oh, I have to carry all of this load, and how terrible am I? And how could Jesus die for somebody like me? But how much do we focus on the joy part of that? How much do we focus on he paid the debt. He took the burden, he took the load, and he did it for me. Yes, for all of us, yes, for all of mankind, but specifically for me, and how happy that should make us. Why are you weeping? Right? You should be able to do both at the same time. Be sad that we're in such a state, but also be so joyous, be so happy, be so thankful that God loved us so much that he gave his only son so that we could know him. Right? This is the crescendo. I don't know if you all remember way back in lesson 4 or 5 or 6, I don't even know which one. We talked about how the story, right, of John, right, is this narrative, and it's this great crescendo, just building from the start of the book all the way up to here, right? You get this resolution for this final conflict, right? The tension between the Jews builds and builds and builds, right? These different signs that Jesus are doing are constantly kind of just poking the fire, right? Making things hotter and hotter in terms of the animosity between him and the Jewish leadership. And this is the resolution, right? They won. And you get this pause where Jesus died. And then finally Jesus says, they didn't actually win, guys. This is the end of it. This is where the story is at its climax. This is where everything is done, right? The story is finished. And what have we talked about over and over again is the purpose of John, right? John states the purpose. What is the purpose of John? That you may believe, right? This is where this section comes from. John chapter 20, verse 31. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. This is the purpose. This is the reason that John has written all of these things down. All these things are written in this order, in this way. All these different snippets, all these different tiny stories are written so that you may believe. That's us. That's me. Yes. Oh, yes, please. Push back. Ooh. Ooh, I love it. Yeah. 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 It's one movement, right? Yeah. Yeah. I might argue that it's one movement, right? You've closed one movement of this symphony, right? The symphony is being written, and this is closing this movement, and now we've moved on to a different part, right? And now there's a totally different crescendo that does get to happen, right? Because we are ultimately working toward a new life, a new earth, a new presence, a new correct. You can't get there without this first piece of it. Yeah. Anybody else? Throwing a lot at you kind of quickly here. All right. Epilogue. So that finishes out the book of glory. John chapter 20 is kind of the end of the book. And then you get kind of this John chapter 21. Okay? What happens in John chapter 21? Anybody remember? Just offhand. Yeah. They're out fishing. They seem like they're kind of sad. They've already had the Lord appear to them twice. And they're out by the Sea of Galilee. And they say like, hey, I'm going fishing. They all go together, or this group of men go together. They go fishing. They're not catching anything. They see somebody on the shore. That person says, cast your nets on the other side. They realize that that is the Lord. They catch all these fish. Peter, when he realizes that that's God, jumps in the water, puts his clothes on, and then jumps in the water, right? Which I find kind of interesting. But regardless, starts swimming toward the shore. I don't know if he beat the boat or not. Like, there's not a huge indication that he actually swam faster than the boat was able to get to shore. And in fact, well, we'll get there. So they cast their nets on the other side. They catch. Does anybody remember the amount of fish that they catch? 153. Why so specific? Does anybody have a good answer? Why? Why is it 153? Why not just say like they caught lots of fish? I have no idea. Okay? So in my research, right, there is no real scholarly conclusion. There's no agreement as to why it's 153. I'll tell you what in my reading of this, what I believe. Okay, so there is some indication that at this time, there were believed to be, in zoology at this time, there were believed to be 153 species of fish. So there are 153 different types of fish at this time. Okay, there's not a ton of scholarly backing for that, but Jerome in the 4th century writes that this is what people believed at that time. So there are 153 species of fish, and by saying they caught 153, what are they saying? If there only exists 153 species and I caught all of them, what does that tell you from like a narrative standpoint? Yeah, they're catching them all. Yeah, Pokemon. Yeah, you got to catch them all. Anybody that grew up in that generation. That they're catching everything, right? There's other indications that it could just be a number of signifying abundance. And that because these men were fishermen by trade, a lot of them were fishermen by trade, they were used to counting the number, right? That was how they made their living. So they had to pay taxes on that number of fish. They had to account for that number of fish. And so that was just like their habit. Like, it was 153. But it's just a sheer abundance. Could also be just to lend like reality, like credence to it. Like, I was actually there. I know because there were 153 fish in that net. It wasn't 200. It wasn't 100. It was 153. I counted them. I was there. So it could lend to that element. Yes? Yeah. Yeah. So there's pieces here. Like, if this net can only do 100 and I've caught 153, it doesn't matter. Like, the net didn't tear. It does say the net didn't tear. So there is some indication that this is more than this net was rated for. There's no more than would be typical, more than would be normal, and you would expect something to break, and nothing broke. So there's going to be just this abundance of harvest when Jesus tells you to go harvest, when Jesus tells you to go fishing. Now, you get this breakfast with God, right? Breakfast with God. Now, it says that there's already fish and bread at a charcoal fire. But he tells them, go bring some more fish. I don't know why, but you go bring some more fish to this meal. And you get to dine with God. They get this chance to physically dine with God, the resurrected God. Again, we could say, like, are there illusions that we get to do, that we get to dine with God? Is there anything we're going to do today where we get to dine with God? We get to sit at his table. We get to eat with him. We get to participate in a meal with him. Is there anything that we might do today? Sure, right? We do it every week. I find that fascinating. I don't really understand why I find that fascinating. I just find it fascinating. Okay, redemption. Who is this redemption for? What is specifically, who gets redeemed in chapter 21? One person very specifically. Peter. How so? He's restored. How so? What do you mean? Yes. So how many times did he deny Jesus? 3 times. How many times did Jesus say, do you love me? You were guessing? 3 times. Right? So you get this redemption story of Peter made a mistake. He knows he messed up, and Jesus says, look, I know you messed up. Here's your opportunity. Do you really love me? Do you really love me? Do you really love me? Peter's strong. So when I say like Hulk strong, right? Like, what do I mean by that? He got the ear off the man, but in this chapter specifically, right? He hauled in the fish. Okay, so John outran him. So John is the runner, okay? John is the runner. John's faster. But those other men couldn't pull that net in until Peter came over. So Peter apparently is some kind of swole dude that can walk over there and just pull this net in, okay? So again, you get this other redemption in terms of, yeah, John maybe throwing a little bit of shade at him, saying like, I outran him. But in all actuality, he's way stronger than me. He came and pulled this net in. I just kind of love that little physical detail of just we couldn't do this unless Peter came over here and helped us. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, be fruitful, right? Yes. Yep. Yep. Oh yeah. 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 This this to me is not Luke's gospel of like facts, right? This to me is a narrative. The way I read the Gospel of John is a narrative. It's very much John has an agenda, and he is writing this narrative, right? These different instances in his time with Jesus, where he's trying to lay the case out for who this man is, but he's also writing this great story, right? You get the redemption of Nicodemus, right? In terms of he comes by night and he's not really sure about what's going on, and he seems very confused, even though he's a teacher. And then at the end, we have no idea what happened, but just this random character that you were introduced to in chapter 3 now gets reintroduced and says he was a believer, and he helped bury him. Okay, that closes out the book of John. In our last 10 minutes or so, we're going to try and go through an overview of the Gospel of John, right? We kind of talked about it. We've alluded to it a lot. Like we talked, there are 4 main sections of the Gospel of John. You get the prologue, which is the first 18 verses, right? Which is this gigantic poem kind of written that points to who Christ is, points to the purpose of why the book is written, and is this beautiful prose on who Christ is, right? That's essentially what's going on here in this prologue. You get the book of signs, which is the first 12 chapters of the book, right? Which is where all the miracles happen. Right, this is years worth of time where we get all these different signs, all these different miracles, all these different interactions between Jesus and the people and the Jews and Jesus, and all these different things happen. That's where all these famous stories come from. You get the book of glory from the chapter of 13, or from chapter 13 through chapter 20, where it's basically a few days worth of time. Most of it is honestly within a 24-hour period of time, where you get Jesus' prayer, like we talked about last week. You get this whole interaction where they're sitting at a meal together, and you have this conversation that gets recorded, right? This very zoomed-in conversation on one meal or one kind of time. You have the epilogue, which here is the very end, right? It's kind of closing the book out. It's saying, like, not all of these story arcs were completed, right? Not all of these characters were made whole again, and now we need to make these characters whole. We talked a lot about the Jewish calendar and how this plays into the book of John, right? You have all these different feasts and festivals and all these different things that happen throughout the book of John and are just referenced kind of in passing. This was at the Passover. This was at the Feast of Booths. This was this. This was this. But all of those things play into the narrative. They play into the story because they set the scene. Now, John does that very, very quickly, saying, like, this happened at the Festival of Booths. And you're just supposed to key into what that means. You're supposed to just automatically pull up this scene in your mind of what that means to you. We don't necessarily get as much of that being Christians in the USA in 2025, right? Like we aren't as experienced with that culture, right? We don't live in Jerusalem. We don't experience these feasts. We have no idea. So it's very hard for me to put myself in that place without really zoning in on what these things mean. We talked a lot about chiasms and literary structure, right? And how this is kind of a mountain that's turned on its side, and right, the peak of the mountain is usually in the middle, right? There's potentially some repetition that may happen on both sides. They're all trying to read across from one another, right? So the base of one side is trying to read at the base of the other. So I can read both statements, I can read both sections, and I can infer that those things are equal to each other, or that we can start to use language to talk about belief equals life and trust equals belief and all these different word salads that we've talked about over and over this quarter, okay? There are a whole bunch of I am statements. There are 7 I am statements, is that right? 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 7 I am statements. There are some other instances of this word. These are in that little booklet that I gave you at the very beginning. If you don't have it, I can get you a printout. I don't have any more books. Sorry, but these are the 7 I am statements where Jesus talks about I and insert thing, right? And again, from a Jewish standpoint, or from a if I live in this culture standpoint, these are all pieces that are pointing to who he is, who Jesus is. These are proof. These are proof texts, so to speak. You get his or my hour. There's a whole lot of emphasis on Jesus working toward this hour, toward this hour, toward this hour. And what is the hour? What did we say? What is the hour? His death, right? His hour, right? His hour will be his death, because that's where things flip. That's where the script changes. That's where everything changes. That's where God is glorified. Christ becomes this new thing. There are 7 miracles or signs. I would argue that there are potentially more, but traditionally what we talk about, there are 7 miracles and signs in this book, right? You get the water into wine, you get the nobleman's son, the man by the pool who's healed, the feeding of the 5,000, where Jesus walks on the water, the man that was born blind, and then culminates with Lazarus being raised. Why we don't count Jesus being raised from the dead in this miracle or signs category, I have no idea, but it's not traditionally counted in when we talk about the signs that happen in the book of John, okay? There's a whole bunch of references to the Son of Man, and we talked some about how that means, like how that should conjure up these images from the Old Testament at what the Son of Man is, who that is, and what his relationship to people are. There are a bajillion titles in the book of John that Jesus is given, and we talked again way back in lesson 1 or 2 about how each one of these titles is going to speak to each person in a different way, right? And how you may identify with the Holy One of God. That may speak to you in this moment in your life, but later in your life you may see the true vine as being the one that you connect with. Or maybe the king, or the redeemer, or whatever the thing is, right? The gate. It doesn't matter. All of these titles are given to Jesus, right? Again, you're painting this picture of who this man is, of who this person is, and how you're proving that he is God. And again, we talked about how this whole book is a giant crescendo. It's this giant building up of tension, giant building of tension, giant building of tension, all the way into the resurrection. Okay? Now, we're going to close very quickly on some of the theology that I see, right? So all of these things, all of these elements paint pictures of how this is a new creation, right? The Word creates a place for man to live in harmony with God. Water and the Spirit flow from this place to the rest of the world. This is a garden. Done. New Exodus. An offering is given to save God's people from death, and water and manna are provided to sustain them. Blood is used to signify this covenant, and it is needed to purify the people and the temple. Done. Right? Jesus does this. The new temple or new garden, the meeting place between man and God, and man can now live in harmony with God if they're obedient. His presence can fill the space and instill some of this holiness onto, some of the glory that we talked about last week. The new Adam, right? Jesus perfects man's role in relationship with God, and he resists this tempter and completely trusts in God's story for mankind. Totally relies on God, totally does the will of Father. The new Eve. Jesus falls into sleep of death, and his side is opened, and the church is taken out of Jesus to be his bride. Now, we are made one with Jesus through this death. We get to be part of this relationship. That, to me, is where all of these elements are laid out in the Gospel of John, pointing to who Jesus is, pointing to his fulfillment of Old Testament Scripture, pointing to how he is God made man. We are 1 minute early. We are done with the Gospel of John. I really do appreciate all of y'all's attention, all of y'all's comments this quarter. Yeah, let me know if anything is confusing or you want to talk more about something. But thank you all so much for your patience.